Amen. Well, good morning. Just a little update. Easter is just around the corner, and we have a great Easter weekend planned. We have Good Friday on the Friday night from 7 till 8 o'clock. Come to our Good Friday service, and then Easter Sunday, because we expect you to bring your street and your workplace and everyone you know on Easter, we're going to have 3 services, 8 a.m., 9:30 a.m., and 11:30 a.m. And just a little warning for those who weren't here last week, because there's more people at the 11 than the 9, understandably so, right? Who are those 9 people? We kind of need to go back to what we used to do at Vintage, and that is try and even out the numbers a bit, which means that we'll be moving service times to these Easter service times. So not the 8, but 9:30 and 11:30. That will continue after Easter. So if you come at 11, you can grab coffee and chill for half an hour, because we'll be starting at 11:30. Now, I do know that almost no one is happy with this move. Don't worry. You're there going, bad move, bad move. It does even it out, and, you know, there are amazing churches with 11 a.m. services that I can help you find. But we just need to do this here, and we hope you stick with us, you know? All right. We are in a series looking at the 3 enemies of the soul. The 3 enemies to your walk with Jesus. When you follow Jesus, it's not all easygoing. Have you noticed that? There are actually 3 enemies to your walk with Jesus. Jesus talks about them, and throughout the New Testament, we hear again and again that there are oppositions, there are headwinds to you following Jesus. Jesus warns us that we have to understand the nature of these enemies. We have to understand how they work. Otherwise, we'll be susceptible to them and we will give in to them. The 3 enemies of the soul. In the companion book that we are all reading together as we're going through this series, a book by a friend of ours called John Mark Comer, Live No Lies, he examines these 3 enemies of the soul in a deeper way. We want to encourage you to read that book. But he says in that book, John Mark says this, our war against the 3 enemies of the soul is not a war of guns and bombs. It's not against other people at all. It's a war on lies. And the problem is less that we tell lies and more that we live them. We let false narratives about reality into our bodies, and they wreak havoc in our souls. Here's my working theory. As followers of Jesus, we are at war with the world, the flesh, and the devil. And the 3 enemies' stratagem is as follows. And he has this very helpful little diagram where he talks about the enemy comes with deceptive ideas, which are tempting to us because we kind of already want them to be true. We have disordered desires. And then it's easy to give in to them because it's just the popular thing to do. It's the way of the world. Deceptive ideas land on disordered desires that are normalized in a broken society. We've been looking so far in this series at what is this thing called the devil and what is this thing called the flesh. And this morning we're looking at the 3rd enemy of the soul, which is the world. The world. What on earth does Jesus mean and Paul mean when they write in the New Testament? What do they mean by the world? So if you have your Bibles, let's turn to Romans chapter 12, which is a letter that the Apostle Paul wrote to a church in Rome. And he said this, Romans chapter 12, beginning in verse 1. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Paul uses this phrase, this word, the world, which is repeated by Jesus and other New Testament writers in a similar kind of way. Do not be conformed to the world. The Greek word here is simply cosmos, and it can be used in the New Testament writings in a very positive way, meaning just the cosmos, the physical world, the beauty of God's creation. But it can also be used with warnings attached to it, in a way that Jesus says, beware of the world. And in those situations, what Jesus and Paul is referring to in this passage is the world which is best described as the patterns, the ideas, and the practices of a culture that are opposed to the way of Jesus. The patterns, the ideas, the practices that are opposed to the way of Jesus. You see, every culture or world has its own vibe, right? Has its own ideas, has its own practices, has its own way of doing things. And we live in one of those cultures, LA, which has its own way of doing things. It's like when you go back to your home in Wichita or wherever it is, people will say, oh my word, you're so LA. You are so LA. And I actually looked at this week of what does it mean to be so LA? Apparently, according to an article I read, so LA has its particular ideas. It's things like we speak Zen to one another, like my heart is so full and all the love and things like that. Secondly, we're laid back and super chilled. We juice. We believe rain is a catastrophe. If we're not stuck in traffic, we're talking about traffic. We work out all day, Soul Cycle in the morning, hot yoga in the afternoon, Orange Theory at night. We never commit to anything. We don't walk anywhere, and we all have a script in our back pocket. You know, that is so LA. But there's lots of good things there, right? That is the pattern of LA. There's lots of good things. But Paul is referring to the toxic things of a culture that become just the way things are done, that are against the way of Jesus. When actually the city starts to act in a way, where the majority acts in a certain way, when just the way things are become a headwind of the way you want to be as you follow Jesus. And in fact, this is how these three enemies of the soul work. The devil comes and with an idea that is not an idea of Jesus, and it lands on a disordered desire. It's like, ooh, that sounds good. And the problem is, it not only sounds good, but it's the popular thing to do. I will fit in if I do that. In fact, I'm encouraged to do that. In fact, that is just the way our city is. These are the enemies of the world. Not the good things of the world, but the ways that the world, the popular ways of doing things, put us into a minority where we tend to give in and conform. You know, there are things that you know, like consumerism, materialism, selfishness, fluid morality, self-defined truth, etc., etc. And most of these things, if you look back, and we looked at this last year a bit, most of this world, most of this culture that's opposed to the way of Jesus began in what Charles Taylor calls this move to secularism. In his amazing book, This Secular Age, he talks about our culture, of which Westside LA is at the forefront, of defining reality for the first time in hundreds and hundreds of years, defining reality without any view to external sources. Whether it be God, whether it be tradition, whether it be church, whether it be family, whether it be political history. That we have untethered ourselves from any sense of external objectivity, and we are now moving forward in defining culture purely according to our own true north, which is our feelings. Our feelings. The autonomous self, as Charles Taylor puts it, has become the god of our culture. Yuval Noah Harari, who's a popular historian and atheist, sums it up quite well in his book. He says this. He says, in earlier times, it was God who could define goodness, righteousness, and beauty. Today, those answers lie within us. Our feelings give meaning to our private lives, but also to our social and political processes. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. The customer is always right. The voter knows best. If it feels good, do it. And think for yourself. These are some of the main humanist credos. And of course, what we see in this separation from any objectivity and purely living into a subjective expression of our feelings is utter chaos at times. Because authentic feelings, don't we know, they're authentic, but they change every day. They lead us in different directions. We disagree with one another on what are authentic feelings. And we've lost our sense of direction. And we find ourselves astray. And so we find ourselves in a culture that is expressing the authentic feelings of this particular age. And we find that as followers of Jesus, we are in the minority to now the majority way of seeing things. John Mark Comer, in his book, summarizes some of these ways of thinking that are now popular but opposed to Jesus. He writes this: lust is redefined as love. Marriage not as a covenant of lifelong fidelity, but a contract for personal fulfillment. Divorce as an act of courage and authenticity rather than the breaking of vows. The objectification of women's sexuality through porn is somehow female empowerment. Greed as responsibility to shareholders. Gross injustice towards factory workers in the developing world as globalism. Environmental degradation as progress. Racism as a past issue. Marxism as justice. Sex as casual adult play rather than a sacred covenant renewal ceremony for marriage. Abortion as reproductive justice, and commitment as a repressive concept denying authentic and changing feelings. Does this ring true of our world? And we can suddenly start to conform. We can suddenly start to confuse and lose our kind of North Star in the midst of it. And we find that we're being squeezed into its pattern. This is, in fact, what Paul is writing again in Romans 12. He says, do not conform to the patterns of this world. And in fact, another translation by a guy called J.B. Phillips, who put it more in street language in English, says, do not let the world around you squeeze you into its mold. It's so tempting, isn't it? When you're the odd one out. When everything looks okay, what's wrong with this or what's wrong with that? Suddenly to lose our anchor in Jesus and start to put our anchor into the majority. It's what is called the herd mentality. See, we're hardwired for community, which makes us very susceptible to the herd mentality, which is simply this: we all want to belong. That's the God-given design of each one of us. And that has beautiful consequences of interdependence, of encouragement and support. But in the broken society, it can also mean that we fall prey to following the crowd, fitting in with the majority, even sometimes when we know it's wrong. The majority is easy. Fitting in is the temptation. But we know, don't we, that if anything of church history or just secular history tells us, the crowd is not always right. The majority don't always know the way to human flourishing. We, at this moment in time, as followers of Jesus, we are living as minority spiritual community in a majority world that thinks differently to Jesus. Now, that may be new for some. It's the world which my wife and I grew up in and we're well used to. I think both of us have only experienced living in a majority for 3 years when we lived in Raleigh, North Carolina. The rest of our lives, we've been that odd minority. I grew up in a town in the north of England where from K through 12th grade, I didn't know any Christians in school. I went to university. Out of the tens of thousands of college students, I knew maybe 5 Christians. When I went to work in the law firm, I met 1. And I remember going to my workplace in Switzerland. We got married and we moved to Switzerland, and I started a new job in a new company. And again, I didn't know any Christians. I remember, living in the minority once again as a Jesus follower. And what's that going to mean? And how are we going to work that out? And the tensions of etc. I remember sitting at my cubicle, massive open floor environment, open floor plan. Hundreds of people from all across Europe were all at the headquarters of this office in Switzerland. I remember working away one day, and suddenly this tap on my desk came from behind me. I kind of turned around. I went, hello? And this man I'd never seen before leant over and said, I hear you are one of us. And I go, I'm sorry? He goes, I hear you are one of us. You worship the king, yeah? And I go, oh, yes, I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian. And he leans even closer and goes, we are not alone. I go, what? And he goes, look. And I looked up over the cubicle, and over the other side of the room, a little head pops up. And so the resistance began. But for many of us, that's what it's like. We're now living as a minority in a world that is very different. Different in its ideologies, different in its ethics, different in what it desires, what it thinks the good life is, to the ways of Jesus. And so the question we have, the question as Jesus wants to look at is, beware of the world. How do we stay faithful to Jesus, stay faithful to who we are, when the world is trying to squeeze you away into its own mold? We have the same temptations, don't we, in LA? And I want to encourage us today, this is how we thrive as a minority, a spiritual minority. This is how we thrive and stay faithful to Jesus. How we refuse to be conformed by the world. The first thing is this. Remind yourself that Jesus is the true north of life. Not a true north, but there's only one true north, and it's Jesus. Be convinced that it was Jesus who said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. If you're looking for the true north in life, if you're looking for how life is supposed to work, if you're looking for how to make the most out of life, if you're looking for the good life, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And I've come that you may have life and have it to the full. You all know there's a God out there somewhere, and you're all kind of scratching around with blindfolds on. Maybe it's this, maybe it's that. I want to tell you, I am who you're looking for. I am the way, the truth, and the life. It's so easy when you're in the minority to start going, well, maybe I got it wrong. Maybe, I don't know, maybe that, or maybe this. And in my journey in doing Alpha, I'm on my 39th Alpha. On my 39th Alpha course, I'm reminded every time, oh my word, God is so loving that he has come to reveal himself to us in Jesus Christ. We do not have to guess any longer. And when the confusions and in the temptations and the difficulties of saying no to the popular things if they're not the ways of Jesus, we have to remind ourselves, like, no, Jesus is the true north. Even though I may be the only one, Man, I'm convinced that Jesus is the true north. There's this amazing passage in John's Gospel, where Jesus he's delivering some pretty tough teaching. It's pretty hard. It's very different to the culture around him. And some of the people leave. Go, you know what? Too difficult, Jesus. And it says this from verse 66 of chapter 6 of John's Gospel. It says this: "From this time, many of the disciples turned back and no longer followed him." So Jesus turned to his 12 disciples and said, "You do not want to leave too, do you?" Simon Peter answered him, "Jesus, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life, and we've come to believe and to know that you truly are the Holy One of God." See, living as a minority will truly test what you really believe about who God is, about who we are, and what is the way to the good life. And for Peter, he looked at people turning away, and he looked at Jesus and said, "Jesus, I got loads of questions. Sometimes you do my head in. And I don't understand what on earth you're talking about. But I do know this. I'm convinced you're the real deal. That you are God. And where else do I go?" This is my own journey. I was raised in the church, raised as a Christian, but then some bad stuff went down in church, a lot of it my own fault. And I left. And part of leaving, when I was in London, part of leaving was actually going, hang on a minute, all my mates seem to be having a brilliant time, and none of them are Christians. I always thought Jesus was like the person who filled the gap and loved joy, peace, and everyone else is miserable. No, they're having a brilliant time. So I'm going to do that. And I'm going to test this little theory that Jesus has that I'm the way to abundant life. So I'm a lawyer in London, earning way more than I should have been. And I had a lot of money to spend. And so I thought, I'm going to live it up. I'm going to do all these things that people are doing that's bringing all this joy and happiness and fulfillment. And because I'm a data-driven guy, I thought every day I'd collect some of my own data on this little thing and create a little spreadsheet on my wall, and at the end of every day would rate how much joy do I have today out of 10. 10, mega, 0, I'm depressed. And I tell you, I know I'm a nerd, don't worry, but every day, for the first few weeks and months, it was like epic, 11s, 12s, right? And then something called the law of diminishing returns set in. It's like, man, I've just got a headache. Oh, that was a bit boring. Oh, man, it's the same thing all over again. Oh, that excitement's gone. I remember the numbers being remarkably declining, and then thinking, this is pretty superficial. This is pretty empty. It's like, I wish someone had told me that I could stuff my life with all of these things, but still be hungry. And for years, I was so afraid of church and didn't like church that I wouldn't go back there, but I was walking around London going, but this is not the good life either. And eventually I went back, and that's a different story. But I went back and I felt like Peter going, man, I still got lots of questions. I've still got lots of stuff I don't understand. And actually that really hurt me. Your church is supposed to be a great place. But where else can I go? For only you have the words of eternal life. And I'm convinced that you are God. See, part of God bringing you to this city is for him to challenge you and test you in your faith, that you drop anchor and go, you know what? No. That may be the popular thing. I just know better. I just know better. That will lead to emptiness. That does not lead to human flourishing. I know better because I've met Jesus. remind yourself that he is the true north. Secondly, remind yourself that it matters how you live. It matters how you live. See, it's interesting that we're living in an age where the Christian gospel, in an attempt to get it out as quickly as we can to as many people as we can, we reduced it so much that you could say in a little sentence, but the problem is we've oversimplified it that people get the wrong idea of what it means to follow Jesus. For many, a generation has been taught, Jesus came with this message, believe in me and you'll go to heaven. Believe in me and you'll go to heaven. Like, I've forgiven you on the cross, all the sins, now you can just go to heaven. And so we're left with this ticket to heaven, and like, well, I can just live any way I want then. Jesus doesn't really care about how I live. I don't have to stand up to the majority. I don't have to kind of do the hard stuff of Jesus. Why would I want to do that? And it doesn't matter, because we all get to the pearly gates and Jesus goes, hey, you believed in me, come on in. The problem with that is there's like a whiff of truth, a little sense of truth, but a lot of incompleteness. Because it does matter how you live according to Jesus. Because actually it goes right to the very essence of what it means to be a Christian. Jesus never said, you are a Christian if you believe in me. And I think that may be a tough word, but I think it's a really loving word because I want you to really know what it means to follow Jesus. James kind of crushes that argument even more because James in his letter says it's not just belief because even the demons believe in Jesus. They may have a better orthodoxy and a view of doctrine of Jesus than you do. And Jesus never said, hey, believe. He said, repent and believe. Believe in who I am, but if you believe in who I am, that has consequences. It's called repentance, which simply means turning around. Turning around from what? Well, turning around from how we got into this mess in the first place in Genesis 1 through 3, where Adam and Eve and every single one of us decides to reject God and define ourselves as God. I'm in charge. I get to define what is wrong and right. I get to define who I and what I and everything I do. I don't need God. And that's what created the problems in the world. That's what the mess is all about. We are like 6-year-olds driving a car. It doesn't go well. Because we were never meant to drive the car. Jesus is the King, and his plan of salvation is not just to forgive us all that we have done, which is true, but he comes to fix the problem by coming back as God and saying, you have to choose to come back under my rule. That's what it means to come back into who you were created to be, is come back under my rule. So to follow Jesus literally is, I'm not going to do my own thing anymore. I'm going to do the things of Jesus. I'm going to do them, not as a way to get in, because he forgives us and accepts us the way we are, but it's what it means to follow him. It's to start going, I'm going to live your way, because you're God and I'm not. That's what it means to come under the authority and the rule of a good, amazing king called Jesus. So it matters how you live, not to merit yourself for salvation, but as a natural consequence of coming under the rule of Jesus. I used to say to people, it's like becoming a chef. What's one of the signs that you're a chef? You cook. If you never cooked, I'm not too sure you're a chef. Right? In fact, that's what the whole letter of 1 John is about. The Apostle John was challenged. John, we're confused about what it means to be a Christian. Could you tell us? So he wrote a letter. These are 7 signs that you're a Jesus follower. Not one of them was just believe. He says, you know if you're a Jesus follower when you end up doing these 7 things, because you are putting your life under his rule and reign. And therefore, you need to examine your life. Am I giving in to this world around me thinking it doesn't matter? Or have I truly converted to following Jesus? And therefore, oh my word, I got to walk this road as a minority. And walk it with joy, because the ways of Jesus lead to life and not to death. Remember that Jesus is your true north. Remember, it matters how you live. This is what we bought into, following Jesus. And then thirdly, remind yourself of your purpose. As a Jesus follower, I just want to say congratulations. Because God has chose you to move from wherever you've lived up until now, to come into the heart of secularism, progressive, anti-Jesus living. Congratulations. Because that's the point of being a Christian. Is as we follow Jesus, who came into the world to bring light into the world, to go where the darkness is, to go where people are dying in depression, anxiety, relationship trauma, where they're struggling with their loss of meaning and purpose in life, where they just don't know how to fit life all together. They may look like they have it all together on the outside, but they're crumbling on the inside. And God is looking at this city and going, it's dark in many ways. I need some light. So he picked Jim, Sue, Sharon, Phil. I need you to move to LA and bring the light to these people, to show them the beauty of Jesus, the way of life that leads to love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. And by the way, the last thing you should do is conform. Because they need you not to conform. That's the whole point. That is our mission. Jesus said it brilliantly, better than any of us. He said, you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how could it be made salty again? You are the light of the world. You don't hide your lamp under a bushel. So you are to be the light to the city around you. I get so excited when God says, I've got a mission for you. I've got a purpose for you. To live out the ways of Jesus when no one else is living them out. So that you can show this is the way to abundance. This is the way to love and peace and joy. This is the way. This is the way God designed it to be. I know you're all doing that stuff thinking that's going to reap amazing rewards, but just wait a couple of years and I'm still here. And guess what? It won't work. To be the beacon of Jesus in our city. You see, that is the role of each and every one of us. To be an alternative to the city around us. Ted Chen leads our diversity walking tours. We love the diversity of our city. And every now and again we go to a part of the town which is rich in a different culture. And so recently Ted led a tour of Little Tokyo up on Sawtell. It was an amazing tour. I wasn't able to go, but I heard about it, I saw pictures as they're walking around. They're in LA, but they kind of feel like they're in Tokyo. They're going around, they're eating ramen and bento boxes, they're smelling all the tastes and smells of a different land, a different country. But it's confusing, because it's like, oh, there's the Hollywood sign, but I kind of feel like I'm in Japan. It's like this little experience of another world. The church, we together, are not little Tokyo, but little heaven. Living together, following the ways of Jesus, not giving in to the world around us, loving the world around us, but saying, come, taste and see that the Lord is good. Look, Our relationships are fueled by grace and mercy, not revenge and bitterness. Look, we carry each other's burdens. Look, we don't chop out of commitment when it goes tough, but we dig in for health. Look, taste and see that the Lord is good. That is our mission in our city. That's our calling in our city. John Mark Comer writes in his book, Live No Lies, he says, there's a tremendous opportunity in our cultural moment for the church to come back to her roots as a counterculture. And while I hope I don't end up crucified in 50 years in some kind of Huxleyan secular progressive dystopia. All right, John Mark. He said, I've already made peace with the obvious reality. I will never fully fit in. I will never be cool. I will never be liked or well respected or admired by culture. But that's okay. The word church itself in Greek means those who are called out. It's not a community of comfort or conforming, but of calling. This is the joy of being called to our city. This is why we need to stick together as a community. We can't do this alone. It's why we stand together, encourage each other, lift each other up, keep the furnace hot, showcase that life with Jesus is a better way, and resist the temptation to give in to the emptiness of the world around us. We love the world. We don't oppose them. We don't shake our fists at them. We simply love them, but go, there's a better way. His name is Jesus. Come taste and see that the Lord is good. Let's stand together. Just love you to close your eyes. Jesus, we thank you for such a time as this you've called us. We've discovered life in Jesus. And we want to help others discover it too. Not by conforming, but by lovingly showing a better way. Just in your heart now, I don't know about you, but I've got to say sorry every day to ways I conform. That may just be me. I got a long way to go, but I'm oriented towards Jesus. So just in your heart now, just bring before him, Lord, I'm sorry for that, for this, for that. Man, I've chosen a worst option. It doesn't lead to life. It may have been the popular thing, may have been the easy thing, but I'm sorry. Guess what? He will never stop loving you. He's always gracious. He is faithful and just to forgive us and cleanse us of all unrighteousness, that we may go, you know what? It's a new day, and I'm going to follow Jesus. I'm going to do it together with my buddies. We're going to be radically generous. We're going to be radically forgiving. We're going to love our enemies so much that they'll ask, who on earth are you? Because we are a Jesus community. Let's worship together.